to join me here today. Today I'm going to run through a little bit of circumstances from my life which are based around a topic which I've covered once before, which is the subject of alcohol. Now, if you're not aware, I still consider myself to be an alcoholic. I haven't had a drink since 2005, and that is kind of my date when I quit, around about my 30th birthday. And I spent an awful lot of time getting myself away from alcohol and finding ways to separate myself from that. Now, I talked about this previously in a video about coping with perhaps being a cross-dresser, being ashamed of who you are, or not being able to express who you are. Maybe to do with being transgender, having gender dysphoria, for example. And I had touched on this subject of how alcohol and drugs and various other things, sex, all sorts of different things can be addictive. Food, these are things that can be used as a temporary comforting factor, particularly when you've got underlying causes of dissatisfaction in your life to a lesser or greater degree. And cross-dressing certainly can cause that. It can cause a lot of shame in people, can cause a lot of negative feelings in people, and turning to alcohol or turning to substances that you could then abuse is certainly something that a lot of people will relate to. What I wanted to just touch on quickly was what kind of happened in my background and where I got to, how I got to where I was, just to kind of fill in some of that background for me. I started drinking in my sort of mid-teens. I guess I was probably drinking properly around about 15, 16 years old, going down to my local pub, that kind of drinking. I'm not talking about sneaking a little bit of, a glass of wine with dinner from your parents, that kind of thing. Because I lived in a rural community, there were really only a few options. You went to the local pub. I couldn't walk or travel to the local town. It was too far away. So I found myself going to the pub, having a few drinks, and later on, once I got my license and I was able to drive, I would find myself going out and going around to a friend's house. We'd go out in the village, have a load of drinks. I'd stay over at his house, drive back the next morning. Knowing what we know now about alcohol and stuff like that and how it stays in your system, I'm sure that there were plenty of times when I was probably still over the limit when I drove home, but luckily I've had no major incidents where I've caused problems or been caught. Let's put it that way. So I was mostly lucky to have never caused an issue with someone else. But I'm sure once or twice I must have been a little bit over the limit as I drove back. When I went to university, however, I moved from the countryside up to a city for the first time ever living in a city. And so I was 19, at the age of 19, going to university and having pubs and bars and student bars with incredibly cheap alcohol. It was really like a sort of paradise for me of being able to get drunk for very little amounts of money, not spending enough money on food, and eating complete rubbish, eating junk food too much, and kind of letting myself go a little bit to pot. And for me, it was at university where I really developed my, I guess, hard drinking. I had a reputation at times that I'd come back to university for the start of a new term, and I would have something with me. I'd be given something as a present for going back to university, like my favourite bottle of Jack Daniels. Now, I'd arrive back at university with a bottle of Jack Daniels, and that bottle would be empty by the end of my first evening back, because I could plough my way through a bottle of Jack Daniels during a day through to an evening, mixing it with Coke. I could plough my way through that in nobody's time. Even to the extent where I would sit with the bottle of Coke and the bottle of Jack Daniels next to me. I wouldn't keep them I wouldn't keep the Coke in the fridge. because it didn't really matter whether it was warm or cold. What mattered was, the next drink and how fast you could get the next drink. So I developed that kind of attitude really quite early on. This attitude of, where's my next drink coming from? Do I have enough alcohol? Do I have enough in the house with me? Am I going to run out? That was always my greatest fear. Am I going to run out? And that was kind of developed at university. So I would always make sure I had plenty of alcohol around, and the chances of me running out of alcohol were really very slim. Moving on from university, I graduated. I developed, coping mechanisms. I was able to graduate university despite the beginnings, of alcoholism. And I started working in companies. I went and got a job. I've been relatively fortunate in my life in that I've never been rejected from an interview. So in my life, I've had two major jobs. The one I have now and the one I had previously, I'll mention in a second. And I've never been turned down at an interview, because I've only really had two interviews in my life for each of my jobs. First and second interviews, but I've had two interviewing processes for two different jobs, and I've got both jobs. Having done that, I started working in a career which, frankly, was incredibly badly suited to me, but I worked in recruitment for 3 years. So I worked in this recruitment industry. I hated it. I hated everything about it. It was almost entirely cold calling. It was salesy in a way that I really don't like. I'm not very good at it at all. And so having arrived and it's all new, I did very well for a couple of months. I did a good job. I matched candidates with jobs. I got paid quite decent amounts of commission. But I ended up, let's say, living a rather meagre existence. If you're not familiar with the industry, recruitment pays very, very little money. So my basic salary was extremely low, but you could get good commission if you did a good job. But like I said, my basic salary was extremely low. And so when I wasn't performing well, and that was most of the time there, I was on a very low salary, and I would still find ways to drink the majority of what was left over. I was terrible at paying my bills. I would, things like council tax bills, electricity bills, I would always find ways to spend the money on alcohol rather than spending it on, on my actual priorities, rent, things I needed to spend money on. I would be spending my money on alcohol instead, even food. When I worked in that recruitment company, one of the things that I used to eat is I used to go out once a week and I would buy a pack of pita breads, and I would buy a pack of these kind of, they're like a sachet of rice with flavouring in it, and you tear the sachet open, pour it into a cup, some kind of receptacle, pour on hot water, and it makes like a sort of rice dish. It's like a pot noodle but with rice. And I used to take one of those and I would fill a toasted pita bread with it, and that would be my dinner for the evening. That's around about, it's about 60 pence worth of food at the time. And that was purely to leverage the ability to drink as much alcohol as I possibly could. I guess the lowest point at that stage came when I almost had to go to court for failure to pay my council tax. And I needed to be bailed out by a friend who lent me the money to pay the council tax. That level, this is where the kind of level of shame of what I was doing built up more and more and more. And the amount of shame that I felt, I didn't stop drinking, but I cut my drinking back so far that in a couple of months I was able to pay that person back and do something really quite quite different to what I had normally done. I'd normally, I just spend my money, but the sense of shame that built up and having to have got in that situation, having to ask someone for help, a colleague, was terrible. But that's something I'd done at the time. And that really helped me to focus in on what I was doing. It didn't stop me drinking, however. What it did was it helped me focus on coping strategies. So I moved on from the possibility of being some kind of a drunk who let alcohol take over my life. That was for me the trigger that flipped me to being still a drunk, but a drunk who would put in place coping strategies. Now, I decided to do stuff like I would save up money as much as I could, and I would pay all of my bills in advance. So wherever possible, I would pay my council tax bill in full at the start of the year, so that at no point in the month would I risk failing to pay a direct debit by having withdrawn cash or paid for alcohol or some kind of monthly mistake. I had a sort of responsible day, a day where I would be responsible, I'd clear bills, and then whatever was left, I could drink my way through it. It was still bad for my health, terribly bad for my health. I was eating incredibly poorly, but around about that time, I left my job in recruitment. And I went to work in the current company that I work in. So clearly I managed to retain my position in this company for long enough to be able to cope with and get over alcohol. So my coping strategies were still pretty good. But the company I worked in would give you a bonus payment every half year. That was something of a godsend for me. That allowed me to take that bonus payment, pay off whatever bills I had to pay my car insurance in full, pay my council tax in full, pay any bills that I had, get them out of the way and just focus on rent and on trying to save up money for a deposit to buy a property, to buy a house. And that was really my life. Coping strategies, finding ways to deal with life. But I was still going into work with crazy massive hangovers. I was good at my job. I was able to maintain my job and to be promoted to even get to manage a team within my company. So I got promoted to managing the team that I had started working in, even whilst coping with alcohol, because I found ways to hide it. I found that, I would use aftershaves that covered up the smell of any alcohol. I'd be really thorough about brushing my teeth, and I would do things to cover up the way I'd been leading my life in, the night before. The telltale sign always used to be, because my weakness was red wine, so red on the lips, like red staining on the lips from where you've been drinking red wine, that was something I had to work quite hard to cover up or to get rid of. And I would also find myself doing whatever was necessary to disguise the effect or the sheer scale of alcohol. I had a reputation of being fun, partying, always going out, always wanting to go out. And yet, when I'd had too much to drink, I could be quite cruel, quite very sarcastic and unpleasant to be around. So there was a kind of tipping point. Don't go out with so-and-so beyond this point because they get quite mean. And so, friendships were quite difficult to cope with as well. One of the things I got very good at dealing with was covering up how much alcohol was affecting me. So I might wake up in the morning and the first thing I would do, having drunk myself silly on red wine the night before and collapsed asleep in some kind of drunken stupor, passing out effectively, the first thing I would do in the morning is probably get up and vomit. And vomiting up bile and occasionally blood. You're not sure if it's blood or red wine, what it is. Sometimes it was blood, sometimes it was red wine. But you are kind of running your body to the edge, massively overweight, eating it very unhealthily. So I weighed around about 4 stone more than I do at the moment. So for you people who deal in pounds, that was, what are we talking about, 28, 56, around about 56 pounds more than I weigh today. So let's say roughly 25 kilos, 25, 30 kilos more than I weigh today. So that kind of level of weight was how much I was carrying around as well, very unhealthy. I even did certain things at the time. So to save money on certain activities like haircuts, I bought a pair of clippers and I would just shave off my hair. So it's much cheaper for me to shave my hair off at home than it was to pay for haircuts. And that was another way in which I could save money to spend more on alcohol. But essentially you can kind of get the picture that at some point I was a mess. Shaved head, overweight, pasty, sort of flabby complexion, and I was really struggling. What happened for me at that point was one of those low points when you're forced to look at the people you care about the most and acknowledge that you have somehow become a failure. And all of this is prior to meeting my wife. I didn't meet my wife till after I quit alcohol. So I had to travel up for this Christmas period, and that situation was a difficult one because I'd allowed myself to get all the way up to Christmas without having bought cards, presents, anything for my family, for my parents, for my brother. And for whatever reason, I just kept buying booze rather than putting my money into something that I knew I needed to buy. I needed to buy Christmas presents. I needed to buy something for my family. And then it got to Christmas Eve and then there's no shops open. And I had to travel up to my parents, get picked up from the bus station. And I've got nothing on me. And I know that the next day I'm going to have to go downstairs and be given presents by my family with nothing to give them back. And that was the time when I realised that what I was doing wasn't really simply affecting me, but I realised that I was going to have to come down on Christmas morning and I was going to have to say, look, I don't have anything for anyone. And I was going to have to sit there and receive presents, receive other people's kindness and if I'd had cards, it wouldn't have been as bad. It's not about the presents, it's about what's written inside the cards. If I'd had cards, I could have written something nice, I could have written an apology, I could have done whatever, but I didn't even have cards. Nothing. And that was really the time when I had to sit and look at these people and think about what it was that I had done. That was 2004, Christmas 2004, when I realised that this was obviously affecting my ability to be a decent person. So Christmas 2004, went through that. It took me a long time to think about how I was going to quit drinking. I went back to my flat and I spent quite a bit of time feeling sorry for myself, still drinking a lot, focusing on what I had done, how sort of, terrible that behaviour was, and feeling sorry for myself. Drinking was a result of it. It hadn't snapped me out of anything. But I got to around about July of that year and realised that half the year had gone and I was in danger of being in the same situation. I tried various different mechanisms or means of coping with alcohol. I tried AA, but that didn't really work for me. I can't subscribe to the general policies they have at AA. I don't subscribe to the 12 steps. I can't do that. So I had to look for something else. I had a couple of evenings where I felt really very low, and I ended up, whilst drunk, phoning the Samaritans in order to have someone to talk to. And I say this again, knowing that the Samaritans are supposed to be there for people who are feeling suicidal. And if I was honest with myself, even at the time, I wasn't suicidal. I didn't have those suicidal thoughts. I was feeling sorry for myself. I was indulging myself. And one of the most sort of shameful things I've ever done under the influence of alcohol is I was rude to a Samaritan's volunteer on the phone because I didn't like the way they were talking. And this is when you know you've hit a rock bottom. When someone takes their time out of their life to take their time and speak to potentially suicidal people, they're volunteering their time, and they have to talk in a way that is understanding. For all they know, I might have been, the way I spoke to them may have been fairly typical of what they get at times. But even so, for me, knowing that I wasn't suicidal, I was simply reaching out, feeling sorry for myself, and then getting angry with this person because their tone was so... They were speaking in a very sort of... And how does that make you feel? How do you feel about that? They had that very hushed, quiet, sensitive tone, which annoyed me. And I had a go at a Samaritan's work on the phone. Now, when you wake up the next day and you realise that you had a go at someone who is trying to help suicidal people because you don't like their voice or the way they're talking, that should be and was for me something of a wake-up call. So I resolved on that day that I would not drink on that day. So the shame of what I'd done the previous evening carried me through that day. It was a Thursday, Friday, something like that. I can't remember what date it was. I feel like it was a weekday. So I got through that one day. I then woke up the following day and decided, okay, I'm going to try not to drink again today. So I didn't drink again. The following day, I woke up and thought, okay, I'm going to try not to drink again today. And I already felt better about myself. But the shame, the sort of low point was carrying me onwards. It gave me enough momentum to keep going. The following week, I went into my office and I spoke to my manager. It was a lovely lady. I love her dearly. What's happened to her is a shame, but I really love her dearly. But I spoke to my manager and I said to her, look, I think I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to be trying to get some help. I'm trying to quit alcohol, but I'm going to try and get some help. And I might try AA meetings, something like that. But they're in the afternoon and I might need to leave, sort of early evening. I might need to leave work early in order to get to a place where I can see people and talk about this and try and help myself. And, she completely encouraged me, said, don't worry about it. Take the time you need to do that. I never took that time because, like I said, AA didn't work out for me. But I took that time and I put that effort into it to acknowledge it to someone. And she was the first person I went up to and said, look, I think I'm an alcoholic. I'm trying to give up. And it's the first person I acknowledged this kind of fault, this flaw in me. And I've acknowledged it to that person. And that meant a huge amount. Particularly how she reacted to me, how supportive she was of me. And that was kind of the turning point. From that point onwards, I shut myself off from situations where I would feel compelled to have alcohol. So, I gave up in August. I gave up drinking on the 18th of August, 2005. And I don't think I went back into a bar or club until around about, it was December. So I went a full 3 months without going into bars, without going into pubs. I didn't socialise outside of work. I didn't go and watch rugby, which used to be a big thing for me. So I kind of stopped socialising with friends who wanted to go to pubs and stuff like that, and kind of distanced myself from those situations. I gave up smoking in October of the same year. So I quit smoking as well. So by the time December came round, and it was kind of Christmas party type season, by the time December came round, I had lost about 3 stone, or 42 pounds, if you want to put it that way, 20 odd kilos. So I'd lost a huge amount of weight. I had loads more money to spend on nice, decent food. I'd started to experience something quite interesting when I felt like I could go out again. So for the first time ever, we went along after work with colleagues. I went along to a bar, and that was one of the oddest experiences of my life. So I went from a situation where I would be drinking, socializing, chatting, happy, fun, going out with people. I felt so awkward. I felt so out of place. I couldn't click with people. I couldn't jive with people. The conversation wasn't flowing. It was stilted. It was difficult. And I'm there drinking lemonade or whatever the hell I'm drinking. It's dull. It was really quite dull to be out. You start to see how people's behaviour change when they're drunk. You see people's personalities change. You remember everything. Going into work on the next workday, going in and remembering everything that was said, every comment, every idiot manoeuvre, someone emerged from the toilets with a toilet seat draped around their neck. Remembering these things was weird. It was really odd. I'd normally be the person that slunk into the office with my head bowed in shame, waiting for someone to tell me what awful things I did. And this was a major, major, major thing. Major change in my life. So that's where I kind of got to. I got to this place by hitting rock bottom. I got through alcohol by realizing that there was nowhere to go but up. Or let's say, to continue down would have meant a cycle into sort of, Shane McGowan levels, if you're familiar with the Pogues, Shane McGowan levels of alcohol abuse. And my insistence on coping helped keep me at a kind of even keel for a while. But it was really that shame of the family experience that drove me to do something positive. The following Christmas, I went back home as usual, and I made what I felt was making amends for the previous year. I hadn't done that thing of, later on you buy presents and you give them to people. I went along to the following Christmas And I did my best to make amends for the previous year, to try to demonstrate that things were significantly different in my life and had turned around. And from that point, I never really looked back. I've not had a drink since. I can have alcohol in food, you know, cherry trifles and stuff like that. It's not a problem. I drink non-alcoholic beer these days, or very low alcoholic beer. It's 0.05% proof. And I just steer clear of getting drunk. I can sip a wine, take a little sip of wine. Just, you know, if someone says, here, taste this, it's great. But I would never drink a glass of wine. And I don't trust myself to enjoy the buzz of feeling good on alcohol without crossing over into the other side of the downside, the quite dickish behaviour, the sort of aggression and the irritation that I find at people. And that's really kind of my story on alcohol. So I wanted to share that here today. It's a long story. If you've made it this far, then, you know, congratulations to you. I wanted to talk about this because it's a key formative part of my life. I get a lot of comments from people saying how everything in my life must be great and how lucky I am with my wife. And I'm going to talk about that in another video coming up. How amazing things seem to have worked out for me. And all I wanted to do was say, look, I have this albatross around my neck. I have this thing that I have to fight and resist that nearly destroyed my life. And if you look at me and think, oh, how marvelous, how amazing everything must be for you, just know that to some extent we all have, you know, our best potential. We all have the best us that we can be. And all I've tried to do, which is all anyone can try and do, I think, is to try to be the best me I can be and not disappoint and let down those who are closest to me. And that's really what I learnt from alcohol. I haven't got here by luck. I had plenty of opportunities to be leading a significantly more destructive lifestyle. And I have lived that for some time. Through all of this, if I have one lesson for anyone, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling sad, if you're struggling with coping with the feelings or the things you're suppressing within yourself, and you find yourself turning to anything as a crutch, be it alcohol, drugs, be it food, or anything else you can be addicted to. If you find yourself leaning on these things as a crutch, as a way of temporarily making yourself feel better, the only thing I would urge you to do is to try to tackle the cause of the problem and not the symptom. I don't feel that I am able to maintain my alcohol-free lifestyle because of purely my will to do so. There are other factors in my life, things that make me happy, one of which would be my family, the most important of which would be my family. Being able to do this allows me to express myself. It allows me to be happy. And as hard as it is to do, and it is a hard thing to do, if you can find a way to deal with the causes of your misery, the things that are, you know, suppressing you, then then for me that's got to be the key thing. If you're in a situation where you feel like you rely on something, and if you feel that you are unable to express who you are, and that this is helping to lower your confidence and encouraging you to continue that dependency on something like alcohol, then the only thing I can urge you to try to do is to try to find a way to acknowledge those things about yourself that are who you are, the things that you probably shouldn't feel ashamed about, and to find ways to live with that, if you can. Having got my life together, I found that my desire to cross-dress, my willingness to cross-dress, bloomed once more, and I was in a position to indulge that. And I felt like I'd kind of earned a break from self-loathing, and that I was in a position where I could look to the future and I could focus on what should be coming next, not what I'd gone before, what was going to come next. How was I going to improve myself today? The difference in me from being a overweight, drinking, smoking slob to giving up the alcohol, losing the weight, giving up the cigarettes, improving the quality of my life, improving what I do with my life, improving the quality of my work. Every aspect of my life improved. And I feel like I am where I am now with my family and with my cross-dressing, almost as a reward, if you will. It's almost a reward. It's a consequence of owning my flaws, owning my faults, and finding ways to deal with them and reduce that dependency on alcohol. And that's why I find myself where I am today. So I wanted to go through it today. I know this is a very long video. If you stuck through with this, then I'm sure you probably have you may have some personal reason for having done so. This video isn't going to appeal to everyone, I know that much. But I wanted to discuss this, get this out in the open and say, if for any reason you look at me and think I've got it all, I very nearly burnt the whole lot up in a bonfire of my own making some 13 years ago. And I've only got what I have now because at the age of 30, I decided that it was either drinking myself to death or making a change. I know for a fact that drunk me would never have probably met my wife. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet my wife, and certainly would never have married my wife. These things happen, I feel, and certainly they happened to me because I gave myself the opportunity for good things to happen. I stopped sabotaging my own life, and I gave myself the opportunity to have nice things happen to me. And yes, that's the main thing. So that's the reason I do this video today. It's to say we've all got things that we need to deal with, and every once in a while it's a good thing to talk about the things that have limited our lives or have influenced our lives for the negative. And this is certainly the one for me. This is my big, this is my big terrible thing that ran the risk of destroying my entire life. Yeah, so again, if you made it this far, congratulations. Well done for that. If there are any questions, if anyone wants to talk to me about alcohol or anyone wants to talk to me about dependency, addiction, anything along those lines, then please do give me a comment down below. If you don't want to comment publicly on YouTube, then send me an email through my email address, which is julietteisnoir@gmail.com. You can find the email address in the description to this video. Send me an email there. More than happy to hear from anyone, to talk to anyone about alcohol, how this affects people, etc. It really doesn't have to be from you from the perspective of being a cross-dresser or transgendered. Alcohol affects, you know, all stratas of society. So yeah, I would definitely encourage anyone, if they wanted to reach out to me for that. And yeah, if there's any specific questions or anything anyone wants to ask me, then you can do so in the comments or through email or through my website, which is www.julietnoir.uk. Thanks for listening to this video. Congratulations on making it this far. And I look forward to talking to you all again soon on a slightly lighter topic. Thanks so much again, and as ever, bye. Bye.